And by that point, I was so surrendered because I'd hit such a huge bottom. And my therapist intervened and sort of put her foot down and said, we got to get some more support here. And I got on an antidepressant and it saved my life. I am so happy to be back with you. It's been 100 years.
A long, long time.
A
And speaking of
long
happy,
time.
the new book is Happy Days. And you share a story in that book of a family tradition back when you were a kid. Instead of saying cheers around the dinner table, you guys would say Happy Days. So I'm curious, talk about the origin of that ritual.
This book, while the title is very uplifting, it's a very deep book. The subtitle is important to share. In fact, I think my publishers for a while didn't even want me to use this title, but it was really important to me because it had that personal story behind it. And the subtitle also is important, which is The Guided Path from Trauma to Profound Freedom and Inner Peace. I open the book by sharing the story in the introduction of how my family would sit around the table and we would raise our glasses and say, Happy Days. And they still do it to this day. But for me at that time, it wasn't true. I wasn't happy. I was struggling. I was suffering. And this is the journey of how I got out of that suffering, how I transformed events from my childhood, disturbances, addiction, trauma, into genuine freedom and inner peace, which is where we are today.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. We're going to cover a lot of it today. But let's zoom back to that time when, you guys were cheersing, saying Happy Days, and things weren't going so well for you on the inside. What were you struggling with? Was it anxiety, depression? How did that manifest for you?
Well, it manifested in high school as, and probably at a very young age as anxiety, and then it moved into anxiety and depression. And I didn't understand why. It got so bad that by the time I was in high school, my mom had to teach me how to meditate to start to calm my nervous system. But it wasn't until I was clean and sober that I started to address the issue. At 25 years old, I got sober, and that helped me begin to address it. But it was always wondering why did this happen? Why did I become a drug addict? Why am I struggling with anxiety? And as I share in the book, it wasn't until I was in my 36 years old that I was able to really uncover the true reason why. And we can get into that if you want to now.
Yeah, we might as well. Let's talk about what was going on.
When I was 36, by that point in my life, I had authored at least half a dozen books. I had been on Oprah. I was engaged to be married, or I was married. My husband was leaving his job to come work with me. We were planning to have a child. And on the outside, that looks like a lot of good stuff. But I was crumbling on the inside. I was experiencing panic attacks and breakdowns and meltdowns. My mantra was, I can't go on like this. That was what I would constantly say. I can't go on like this. I can't go on like this. Finally, I cracked, truly. And I cracked open into a memory that had been disassociated for many, many years, for decades. And I had a dream that I had been sexually abused as a child. And I woke up that morning and I said, no, never talking about that again. That is way too real. I'm never touching that again. Pushed it down, walked away. 3 days later, I was in my therapy and I was addressing some other issues that were related to this experience and this dream. And within moments, I flew off the couch and just fully accepted the memory. And that was the point where I recalled a traumatic event from my childhood that I had dissociated from and brought it back into my conscious awareness, which was terrifying in so many ways. And since that time, I've been on a very devotional path to undoing the trauma from the past to be free in this present moment. And in my devotional path, I've been guided to many therapeutic processes, many spiritual principles, teachers' guides, and I have transformed my life through this commitment. And I wouldn't have been able to write Happy Days if I hadn't lived it first. This book is my experience, but it's also my guidance on how you as a reader or a listener can experience the same kind of radical shift through my lens. And that's my prayer for this book, is that it serves countless souls, as many people as possible. People are suffering. We all have experienced trauma in some form, whether it's trauma with a big T, trauma with a small t. And small t trauma is something like being bullied or being told you were stupid by a teacher. Big T traumas are growing up in a violent household, it's just childhood abuse, any kind of sexual violence, really big moments that, especially if they're repeated, become big T trauma. We all have it in some way. We all have it in some way. And now it's time to go there and address it.
Well, the thing about trauma is it's like you said, something that we all deal with on some level. And dealing with it is hard enough as it is. And we're going to get into how we can go about doing that in a healthy way. But you have this unique angle where you're in the public eye. You talked about, you had been on Oprah and you're doing all these different speaking events and writing books. So let's before the trauma came back into your memory, you talked about how, things started to fall apart on the inside. And I think it was, your mental health started to decline and things were really in turmoil. How did you go about keeping yourself in the public eye and keeping that together as things were falling apart in your own life?
I was burning the candle on both ends. I was so physically unwell. I struggled for decades with extreme gastrointestinal issues, just constant. I was underweight. I was just unwell. I would get sick all the time. It was just weak immune system because my body was in that my system was in an allostatic load. I had overridden my capacity to manage stress naturally. And so now I was just working on overdrive. And that sucked. And so by the point of being 36 and breaking and cracking, it was becoming very clear that those defense mechanisms were no longer working, that I couldn't go on like that. Physically, mentally, spiritually. Couldn't carry on.
And I know part of your coping mechanism was, overworking. So
Mhm.
I'm sure, during that period of time, your career is really growing and there's so much happening. It facilitated, I'm sure, in a way, the trajectory of your career. So it had that double-edged sword
Yeah.
to going through that at that time.
I have such a beautiful perspective on this now. What's so gorgeous about this is that I've throughout the past decade, I have had a therapist who practices what's known as internal family systems therapy. And I didn't even know that she was practicing this form of therapy. I just knew she was doing something. Then I started reading these books and following this amazing therapist named Dick Schwartz. And he had invented this system called internal family systems therapy, which immediately I was like, oh my God, that's what I'm doing in my therapy with my therapist. Then I became so obsessed with it that I wrote about it in the book and I got trained in it. So I'm now certified in the level 1 training. I will, I have the CE credits for my level 1 training, and I will carry on to continue learning and studying this model. And I'm so obsessed with it because what I understand now, first, let me just sort of break down what IFS means to me, and then I can share with you how that affects my perception of that younger self and what she was going through, or the younger part of me than what she was going through. So the simple form of explaining IFS is that we are multiple different parts of ourselves. We're not one mono person. We have what's known as exiled parts. That for me would be the abused child. The exiled parts are typically young child parts that have never had the resolution that they needed to come out of fear, or come out of trauma, or come out of a feeling of inadequacy or being unlovable. And so we take those young parts and we say, no, we're not going to go there ever again. Like, I never want to hear that voice again. I never want to feel that feeling again. And we tuck it away, we put it under lock and key, and we build up all of these forms of protection so that we never have to feel those exiled parts. And the protectors are parts in themselves. They become, in my case, the workaholic, the cocaine addict, the rager, the controller is another one. I had one called Knives Out. Like anytime I felt challenged, I'd be like, Knives Out. So we have all these forms of protecting ourselves. Anyone listening right now, you know your protectors. Your protectors could be the anxious part of you. The protectors could be the obsessive part of you, the addicted part of you. They're something extreme that we do in the place of feeling the exiled part. Are you clear on that? You with
Yeah.
me? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What we all have, though, is access to this part of us that is the truth of who we are, which is self. Self is commonly thought of in my old lexicon as God, or not my old lexicon, I would be interchangeable here, but as God, as the universe, as the presence, a non-physical presence of compassion, love, kindness, care, calmness, generosity, the part of us that is undamaged, the adult part of us, the part that doesn't carry the baggage and only can look at it all with compassion. And so as I started to practice this program, and most recently in studying this model, I have deepened my own practice with it. And what I can say now as I look back at the workaholic part and the drug addict part and all those parts from my past and how hard they were working, I can see them with gratitude and compassion. I can see that the workaholic did a really good job. She wrote 9 books in 11 years. She served millions of souls. But she was doing it in a very extreme way. And now she can keep doing it, but not in such an extreme way because she has access to that self within me. She has the access to the truth. And she has access to self-soothing and self-compassion and self-energy. And so this is a great example that you brought up. Right now, I'm back in sort of hustle mode. And whenever I would launch a book over the years, it would be like the most extremely intense time. And it always is just because there's so much to do. But right now, I'm letting that controller workaholic part, I don't even want to call her workaholic, but worker, committed worker, show up and do what she has to do to be present and to do these podcasts and to share the book far and wide because it means so much to me and I know it will serve so many. But I also can reach out to my publicist and my assistant and say, guys, clean up my schedule a little bit. I need an hour here, not 10 minutes, and I can lie down for 15 minutes in the middle of the day with my kitten. I can take a sauna for an hour at night and maybe not show up to my kitchen until 6 rather than 5 till I'm taking care of myself. I can continue to pray. I can get good sleep. So I've never shut down that part of me. I just helped her be less extreme.
Yeah. It sounds like now you're aware and you're in control.
In control isn't the word I would use. I would say I'm aware and I'm in the service of that part. That myself can notice, oh, that part's starting to burn out. How can I help her? Let's see what she needs. Let's check in. And this is a lot for one quick example. It's in the book. I really break down internal family systems in a profound way in the book. It's been a humongous part of my process to be able to recognize, speak to, see, and soothe the activated parts of myself.
Well, let's get really granular on what that looks like. You gave examples there. Somebody, overworking. You mentioned cocaine, so drugs. So, say somebody's listening right now and they can recognize one or multiple of these protectors as coping mechanisms that they're using right now to push down feelings, to push down trauma. How do we use those as a compass to find out what's really happening underneath?
In my work, I wouldn't guide people to go to those exiled parts. I believe that needs to be done in a therapeutic setting. But my work is about helping the extreme protector parts gain access to self. Because when they have that direct access, they can start to calm down in the system. And when one protector part starts to calm down, all the other parts can kind of follow suit. At times, sometimes the other parts will spike up, but this is the practice. Would you want to do it with me?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, great. And it doesn't have to be anything extreme. It could just be like something that's up for you right now that you unconsciously know or consciously know is up and you kind of want to check in on it.
Sounds good.
What's going on with you? Where are you at?
Well, I'm going through a really unique time right now because we just had our second child 2 months ago. We have a 2-year-old at home as well, so
Whoa.
we're adjusting to a new family dynamic that's beautiful, but it's also a lot of new. And we recently moved homes as well. So a few months ago, we moved to a different city nearby, and so a lot of new, a lot of getting regrounded and situated within this beautiful life that we're living.
Mhm. What's the issue, though? What's the I don't even wanna call it an issue, but what's the part that's showing up that might feel a little disconnected for you?
I would say it kind of relates to what you talked about, work life balance. I work from home, so I'm connected to the family, and there's so much going on, so much to do. So it's making sure that I'm getting the work that I need to do, and then being the dad and partner I need to be.
Mm,
I'm doing a good job, but I'm just learning as I go because it is all new, and
mm.
and I think working from home makes it a really unique experience.
Mhm, mhm. So, let's just turn your attention inwards for a check-in, and I just want you to check in with your sensations and any thoughts or feelings that come up when you think about what this life balance is like to you right now.
Maybe just a little bit of, chaotic energy, a little bit of,
Chaotic. Beautiful.
um and again, it's hard to put words to it. Like chaotic sounds, pretty intense. It's beautiful, but it's a lot of
Oh, yeah,
juggling
no.
and
Yeah, chaotic energy. Listen, man,
yeah, chaotic.
I am a mother of a 3-year-old. I, was actually meant to be delivering this month. Sadly, I lost the pregnancy at 5.5 months, which was rough. But I had a lot of this anticipatory fear as well. How am I gonna have 2 kids, launch a book, all that, right? So I'm with you. And even having a 3-year-old is a lot, so I'm with you. I got you. So with that chaotic part. Can we talk to that chaotic part? And are you feeling comfortable calling it the
Sure.
chaotic part? Beautiful. Good.
Yeah.
Good. We all parents, we got it. We got it, man. What do you notice now that we've referenced it as the chaotic part? And I want you to just sort of spend some time gathering attention towards it and just noticing it.
Okay.
Anything that it wants to say, any images that it might have, any words to it, or how it feels in your body.
Kind of just an image of me darting around and um speedy.
Speedy.
Um yeah.
What does it feel like physically? Do you have any physical sensations that you would describe? You don't have to.
Very sympathetic, like sympathetic nervous
Sure,
system.
sure, sure. Yeah.
It feels very, um kind of like electric and
Electric. Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And how do you feel towards this part?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it serves me. I'm somebody who can relate a lot to, your story of being somebody that can, put my nose to the grindstone and get a lot done, and it serves me well. Um, but it feels unsustainable, I would say.
Mhm. 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 Okay. Beautiful. And when you focus attention onto this part and you notice that it feels unsustainable, what comes up for you?
The word balance, taking more time for self-care, um, slowing down.
So you're wanting for that part to feel calmer.
Yeah, wanting to have more time to take good care of myself and to slow down.
Beautiful. Okay. And how did this part get its job? How did it pick up this role of being sympathetic and working so hard originally?
I think just to, make sure my career, took off and I was feeling, in a position where I could take care of myself and my family financially and um that kind of thing. Just wanting to make sure that I was doing all I can to make sure work took off in a good way.
Okay. And so what does it mean for you to have that need to have work take off in a good way?
Security,
Mm.
financial security and just security in general.
Mhm. Mhm. Is that something that you are still concerned about or even though you've gotten this far?
No, not at this point. But again, I think it did serve me well leading up to this when things, were a little bit, um, growing and I actually had a career change too. So during the career change, I really needed to put the nose to the grindstone and work hard to make sure that transition was smooth as possible.
Okay. And so now that you're in another life transition with a move and a newborn and a 2-year-old, it's it's looking like this part might be just reactivated a little bit. Is that possible?
Yeah, yeah,
Great.
that makes sense.
Beautiful. And so it's so gorgeous to see how much gratitude you have for the part because it has done an excellent job in getting things done and moving you through quickly and achieving success and changing careers. So I appreciate that acknowledgement that I'm noticing of this part. I want to acknowledge the acknowledgement. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
But right now, it's showing up again, and that's beautiful because there's a reason, that's a sign for it to show up. But I'm wondering if it wasn't doing its job in this way, what else would it be doing?
If it wasn't, trying to balance the work and family,
Yeah, what else would it be doing? If it wasn't trying so hard, what would it be doing?
that's a good question. I would say just being more calm, relaxed, just being more present.
Calm and relaxed and present. Yeah. I'm noticing so much compassion coming from you now towards that part. It's like, oh yeah, that would be nice. So can you just take a moment and if you were to see this part and you wanted to bring it to a place where it could feel calm and relaxed and present in your mind's eye or just what comes to mind, where would that be? Like what is there a place that would feel calm and relaxed and present for this part?
I would say just on the couch with my family, just being together, being cuddled, being, physically together and being
Hmm.
present and
Hmm.
emotionally connected.
So you're with your family, babies are sleeping maybe. Everyone's physically connected and you're inviting that part to be with you there. And just take a moment and just maybe even close your eyes if you feel called to just see yourself on the sofa. Anything that comes to mind now that you have invited this part to join you and your family in that calm space.
Just a feeling of, calmness, stability, happiness, warmth
Yeah. So now, how do you feel towards that part right now that you've held that vision?
toward the part that's toward
That's
like
chaos,
the
to
work,
the
the
chaotic part.
chaotic
Yeah.
part. I feel, I'd say grateful for it because it has served me in so many ways, and also more at peace with it.
Mm. Do you have any fears around that part being in that relaxed place?
No, no, it feels good.
Awesome. Beautiful. So, what I want to suggest is that whenever you notice the part activating, take a moment and take it to the couch. Just invite it back to the couch. Do you have a gender for this part?
For the chaotic word,
Mhm.
I didn't, and I'm thinking about it now.
Doesn't have to have a gender
Not
at all.
specifically, no.
Okay. Okay, great. So just see it as a part of who you are that needs to be retrieved on an hour-to-hour basis right now. We just gotta bring it back to a safe place and give it a chance to relax. And just one more time, I'll ask you any concerns about what would happen if it relaxed?
No, not at this point.
Excellent. Beautiful. Excellent. So what you did right there was so gorgeous. You What we did really in that process was help you bring that self energy of compassion and calmness and curiosity to the part that was in an extreme place, the chaotic part in an extreme place. And with all that compassion and gratitude and all the things that you brought to it, you could not only see it as something that's served you, but you can also see that it can still perform, but not in such an extreme way. So it doesn't have to be negatively performing. So my hope for you is that you keep noticing it and just asking it what it needs and asking, would you like to go back to the couch right now? And maybe that feels like you take a breath and visualize the couch or whatever it is. But when we start to establish that direct access from the compassionate, caring, curious part of ourselves, the self energy, towards these extreme parts, we do exactly what you and I just did, which was we helped it relax. We helped it accept that it didn't have to do this job in such an extreme way, but it could still show up.
That makes sense. And I guess what makes this so hard is that, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well, when that quality that is extreme, the chaoticness, it does serve us so well, and we can look back and have that positive reinforcement that, it has got us to this point in our careers and has gotten us, you know,
Mhm.
to this point as parents, but it doesn't serve us, ourself, and our well-being.
Mhm.
It's like everything else is working, but, at the expense of our own well-being.
That's right, man. Mhm. Everything else is working at the expense of our own well-being. So these extreme parts for many years may not totally burn out, right? So it's like when these extreme parts burn out, like when I was a cocaine addict and I hit my knees and I was like, I got to get sober. It did for itself what I couldn't do for it at that time, which was like just give it permission to slow down. But when it's sort of a low grade part that's extreme, we kind of are like, I need that, or we don't even notice it, or we just sort of survive with it. And so, what now the goal isn't to exile that part or shut it down. It's just to help it be less extreme because you want that part. You want that part that's sort of on alert, making sure everything's cool, making sure the fam is cared for. But it doesn't have to be on high alert. It doesn't have to be in fear. It doesn't have to be overactive or anxious. It can just stay steady and be calm and be on the couch and still get its job done.
Keep it in check.
Yeah, that's right.
Coming back to your story, Gabby, and, when things were really falling apart for you and you were in the public eye, what did you do about sharing that experience with your audience? Did you, wait some time till things, began to get back under control, or did you start to share right away? And what I'm referring to is before the memory of the sexual abuse, back before that, after you'd done Oprah and stuff, and things were really kicking off with your career. And I think you mentioned anxiety and your mental health started to degrade, and I think your physical health too. So talk about during that time and as a public figure, how you handled that with your audience.
Well, when I remembered the trauma, I said to my speaking coach, I was preparing for a talk that was coming up 2 months later, and I was terrified to get on stage because I was so vulnerable and so cracked open. But I said to her, "Well, I know I have to share about this. It's such a big part of me. I can't believe I haven't known this for so long." And she was like, "Slow down, sister." She explained to me that if I share too soon, I will reactivate myself and my audience members. And sometimes I don't know what's gonna come out of my mouth when I'm on stage. So while I went into that talk with the intention of not bringing it up, a young woman mentioned her experience of sexual abuse, and I just responded to her. I said, 1 in 3, including me. And it just came out of my mouth. And then that was sort of the door opener. Following that event, I led another workshop, and I think I got a little too further into it. And so I noticed that she was right, that the ways that I was not steady enough in my own recovery to be able to hold energy for others in this conversation. And so I was not only reactivating myself, but I was reactivating my audiences. So thankfully, I adjusted and made the commitment to turn inward and to do the work on my own really deeply for the last several years. And I knew that I wanted to write this book, but I knew by no means I remember in 2016, 2017 being like, I need to write a book on trauma recovery. How can I do this? And I just remember the voice inside me saying, absolutely not. Not until you are steady enough and safe enough and on the other side. So I learned from that experience. But the other ways that I handled it were I was in a lot of therapy. I had 3 therapy sessions a week. I was really doing whatever I could to get better. And all the while I wrote probably 3 books in the time that I've been in this recovery period. Since 2016, I probably wrote 3 or 4 books. And that was even part of my healing process. When I was writing my book, The Universe Has Your Back, which has been one of my most impactful books, I remembered writing and sort of feeling checked out and so depressed. And I was waking up every day so depressed and so sad. It makes me really sad to think about it. So I was really early in the recovery period. And then I got a second chance with that book because I submitted it and I sent it to my publisher and I was like, okay, it's due now. I just got it to you. And I like whipped it up. And she was like, then I read it over that night before I heard back from her. And I was like, shit, this is not good. And I got an email from her the next day. She said to me, Gabby, the book isn't due for another 2 months. And I cannot even possibly contemplate looking at this right now. In that moment, I was like, the universe has my back. And I spent those 2 months just really going deep into my faith and deep into my spiritual connection and giving the book the spiritual medicine that I needed at that time. And so that process, those 2 months were extraordinarily healing for me. So it was another way that I was showing up for myself while showing up for my readers and my audience members.
You've been through so much in the last number of years, talking about this memory coming up from your past, the sexual abuse, and you talked about your son there. I think you said he's 3 years old. You share the story in the book with him, and right after he was born, we see on Instagram everybody sharing this beautiful time and things are all well and cheerful and happy. But the story you share in the book, 4 months after that, it's Mother's Day back in I
Mhm.
think 2018. You're heading to your mother-in-law's house, and you're falling apart inside. Let's talk about what was going through your mind and the challenges of being a new mom.
Mm. So I'm in the back of the car on my way to Mother's Day. My kid's a few months old, 4 months old. And I'm saying under my breath, I want to die. And I get to the table at the Mother's Day lunch and I start crying at the table. And my mother in law walks over to me and she's like, it's okay, honey. All new moms are anxious. And I looked at her and my sister in law and I said, this is not just new mom anxiety. And it took me way too long to get a diagnosis, but ultimately I was diagnosed with postpartum depression, insomnia, and anxiety. And the reason it took me so long to get the diagnosis was I was very hooked into the wellness space that I'd been living in for my entire career. And I was following all these different people in my field and authors that were published by the same publisher and just feeling like, well, I can't possibly, get on an antidepressant or get help that way. I mean, that would be like the worst thing ever, right? Thinking that it was so shameful to seek. And so I was trying ashwagandha and trying melatonin and trying meditation and all the while going through a biochemical reaction to pregnancy, to postpartum. And I took months off of my life in those 3 months or those 4 months that I could have enjoyed with my child and my newborn, my husband. And instead I was in the most extreme depression I've ever known and not sleeping at all, an hour a night maybe. It makes me so sad to think about this time. But it's important that I share this, especially to you right now. You have a mama at home with a 3-month-old or 2-month-old?
2-year-old and 8-week old.
Yes, an 8-week-old baby. And so I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to the moms. I'm speaking to the women who have survived this, the husbands who have survived this with their wives. Postpartum depression and anxiety is far too common, and it's way too underdiagnosed because of the shame, because of the stigma, because of the mental health stigmas in this world. Because we're expected to be perfect when we birth the baby, and then we're like back into our body, and everything's perfect, and everything looks good on Instagram, and we have like blue balloons everywhere. Fuck that. It's hard for any mom, any father, particularly those of us who experience that kind of response, and it's very common. And so eventually I share in this chapter of the book that the chapter is called Don't Call Me Crazy. I share that I've ultimately found my way to psychiatric support. And by that point I was so surrendered because I'd hit such a huge bottom and my therapist intervened and sort of put her foot down and said, we got to get some more support here. And I got on an antidepressant and it saved my life. It saved my life. I will never shame anything medically related at any point. I think that things are absolutely overprescribed at times, and you as the individual have to work through your own conscious awareness of, are you being overprescribed, or, check in with yourself, your doctor, trust your doctor. But when it comes to mental health, it's so underserved in that the shame holds us back from getting the help that we need. If you had a heart condition, you would take any kind of medication your doctor gave you. Why is that not the same with your mental health? So my message to you, to the new mamas, to the mamas who have been through this, just continuously check in with your wife, continuously check in with yourself, women. And I want you to just make sure she's sleeping, make sure she's eating enough, make sure she's not overly anxious. Anxiety is part of the process, but she's not out of sorts anxious. You can even go get some of the intake forms of they're like little checklists that you can get from your doctor of, like, what's going on with my wife for real, and make sure that the OBGYN is checking in on her. And postpartum, they say, oh, it typically comes in the first 6 weeks. That's not true. For me, it came 4 months later. So and so many people live with it for years because they go undiagnosed. And what's important about that part of this chapter is that this is a book on spiritual and therapeutic intervention so that you can heal. But I also had to mention the psychiatric support, because I believe that God works through books, through doctors, through therapists, and through medication. God is in all of it. And we can't be too wellnessy to see the truth that there is support in other forms. And either area overdone, right? Overused or over committed to isn't necessarily going to serve someone, because there's a lot of different modalities for healing, and we have to be open to the creative possibilities for our healing path. And sometimes that's going to come in the form of a pill.
I think that's so important you share that. And you touched on this quickly, being in the spiritual world, being a leader at the time when you went on that medication, you know, you're you talked about, and again, you just brushed on this, but I could sense that you had some resistance there. Different people in that realm, the other leaders might look down upon, medication. So you talked about the general stigma against mental health. You're in this other, coming back to what we touched on before, you're a public figure. So you have this other layer on top of it as well. So talk about that, because there was that fear there when you became public with the fact that this was something that was helping you. How did people actually respond?
I got no negative backlash at all, because I shared about it when I was no longer ashamed of the decision I made. As long as you share about something vulnerable from a place of steadiness and groundedness and recovery and free of shame, you won't ignite that shame in others. So I'm sure I ruffled the feathers of many self-help book authors or naturopaths or whatever. Not all of them, of course, because many of them are on the same path as me, balancing and choosing both Western and Eastern. But I'm sure I ruffled the feathers of some folks in particular. But I didn't care. And they would never dare come to me with any of these mentions, because in my deep, profound respect for my decisions, I only attracted that deep, profound respect back to me.
That's beautiful. And alongside the medication, you were already somebody that was doing
Yes.
meditation on a daily
Yes.
basis
This
and
is
and
important.
living a
Yes.
healthy lifestyle.
Yes. No, this is the
Let's
most important point. Yeah.
let's talk about where you're at, because again, you had this layer of armor that you've been building for years in the natural health realm,
Hmm.
and you still ended up becoming depressed and had postpartum depression. So I want to highlight that point, that a lot of people aren't doing all the things you're doing, and likely are going to be more likely to fall to depression.
Yeah.
And two, let's talk about where your healthy lifestyle was at that time
Hmm.
and some of the things you're able to up in the natural health realm
It's the
alongside the
most
medication to
important
get
thing.
yourself feeling better?
This is the most important question here. Here we go. One of the things that my psychiatrist said to me when she's handed me my prescription was she said, listen, you've spent decades developing spiritual faith and conditioning. You've spent decades in weekly therapy. You've spent decades practicing beautiful methods like emotional freedom technique and meditation for regulating your nervous system. You have tremendous tools. And this medication will help guide you to an even safer baseline, a greater baseline of safety so that you can do the deeper work, so that you can go to the deep places that scare you, so that you can touch into the trauma with a safer steadiness. And so I took that and I ran with it. I took the pill and I took up 3 therapy sessions a week. I had an IFS therapy session, I had a somatic experiencing therapy session, and I had an EMDR therapy session every single week. I just want to be real, not everybody can afford that much therapy, but if you can, use your money wisely. And if you can't, there are therapeutic services out there that are very affordable and attainable. And I have actually all the resources inside my book, Happy Days. And even Happy Days itself can be a resource for somebody right now. But I used my money wisely and I put it towards my mental health. So I didn't just take a pill and numb out because, by the way, that wouldn't work. I might feel a little less anxious, but it wouldn't have taken me any further in the resolution of these disturbances from my past. So I used it to feel safer in my system and then go far, far deeper in my spiritual and therapeutic practices. And that is the only way I would have been able to write this book, is the deep therapy I was able to do. And so you don't just take a pill and just shut down. You use it as another tool in your spiritual toolkit to get to develop and enhance the other tools that you have to deepen your inner awareness and to feel freer than you could have before.
I love that. And to put the timeline together, because I'm just trying to picture your mental state at that
Mhm.
time, we talked about, recalling that traumatic memory from your childhood before and dealing with that situation. Was that how much before did that occur before the postpartum depression? And was that still a factor at that time that you were working through?
Oh, yeah. I think they're pretty interconnected, actually. Often, a lot of people, women that experience postpartum, do have trauma in their history or anxiety disorders, or unresolved stuff, because it's the it's a biochemical condition, but it's also react giving birth reactivates our childhood trauma. So while I had done at that time, I delivered in 2018, at the end of 18, and I remember the trauma in the middle of 16, so 2 years about, that I had been doing a ton of trauma recovery work, but I was far from resolved. So I had the tools available and ready on demand, ready to go. And then I had the baby and I had the most amazing, beautiful birth and most amazing pregnancy. And then it turned into this horror show of PPD, and that was horrifying. But I remember sitting there thinking, okay, 15 years of hard work for overnight success. Let me get to the bottom of this. Once I found my path, my way to the diagnosis, I made the commitment to go ahead first and just use everything I had in my toolbox.
And you talked about the medication, being a tool and really helping you through this time. Is that something that you're able to wean off of over time, or is it something that still is helping you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not, I think that when one gets on a medication and it soothes their system and they don't have symptoms from it and it's enhanced their life, it's an individual decision how long you want to stay on that kind of medication. But many people will stay on it for a long time because it's so supportive. And a lot of these people that, talk about like, oh, I had to get off that. Okay, maybe because there was some kind of issue up for them with it, like it was causing some other kind of side effects, which is totally true and real. I want to be honest about that. And thankfully for me, the first medication I tried didn't cause any side effects. And so, yeah, the support that I had at that time, I began to titrate off of, and some of that support I will continue to use, and it's just really dependent. But early days, I mean, I was really conscious of not getting into a pattern with some of the support systems that I needed at the time to even sleep through the night, you know?
Gabby, it seems like more and more these days, on social media and through a lot of the conversations I have on the show, psychedelics are being brought up as a tool to
Mhm,
help with depression and help
mhm,
with mental health challenges. I'm curious, is that something that you would advocate for or advocate for
mhm.
people doing research into, or how do you feel about that?
I don't typically advocate for things I haven't tried, but what I will say is this. If you had asked me this question 5 or 6 years ago, I would have been really judgmental about it, and I would have said, "Oh, I'm sober, I couldn't possibly even contemplate that." The more I've looked into it, and the more I've studied this, and the more I've talked about it with therapy professionals, including my own therapist, including leaders in the space, and understanding how they're using it in these individual moments in time, potentially even one session, with the hands-on guidance of a trained professional using a model in some cases, a model I really believe in. I think it's an excellent opportunity for transformational change. It is something that I have on the shelf as a possibility to look into when I wanna just take it to the next level with my trauma recovery. I believe that the studies and the experiences are showing that it's absolutely supportive for addiction and trauma and other unresolved disturbances. So the answer is, yeah, I'm interested. I'm interested to learn more. I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm interested to continue to talk to the people in my field that I respect deeply, and the therapists in my world that I really admire. And it's been very valuable to hear their take on what this means. The concern I have about it is that it's been popularized and it's been sort of mismanaged with folks who are not trained professionals, people who are taking into innocent people on journeys week after week. And sometimes my girlfriend says it like this. She goes, "Eventually, the journey just becomes a party." So, and I'm concerned about that for my fellow sober brothers and sisters that may be like, "Oh, I'm going to microdose because that's." I mean, that's a slippery slope, right? So, if you were going to use these kinds of methods for healing, I would say just make sure you're doing it with a reputable, trained professional, not some random dude that calls himself a shaman. That's my opinion. I'm gonna be very controversial in this space in some way.
I mean, you have a whole nother layer when it comes to this conversation as somebody who, is sober at this
Totally.
time and was addicted to cocaine and other substances. So I think it's a really unique perspective and it's almost like a gray area when it comes to using those psychedelic medicines,
Mhm.
those plant medicines for somebody who is in recovery.
100%, because you could go get a surgery and they could hand you 3 days of oxycodone or however you say it, and you're an addict, and you absolutely need to take it, but you don't have, or maybe they send you like a week's worth, and you don't have a friend or a sponsor or a loved one watching over your dosage, and you can just completely go out on that, right? It's all about, if you're sober or if you lean into addictive patterns with substances, you absolutely must be in the care of a professional. You absolutely must be in conversation with your sponsor. You absolutely must be honest about it in your 12-step meetings. You absolutely must be honest about it with your loved ones and your, just being in the conversation, or just not do it at all, right? But there's possibility for people to have genuine recovery with these methods, and if it's done in the care of a therapeutic support system that is very well aware of what the process is and how to ensure you don't have an experience of going out on drugs, then I think it's possibly very, very impactful.
Gabby, you took me through that exercise earlier about, the chaoticness and the overwork and creating that balance. I'm curious, somebody who's listening right now and they're feeling like, I want to do this work. I want to find out where my trauma is with a capital T, with a small t, dig in, really get dirty and get to the root of, why I may be behaving in these different ways. Cause, overworking, addiction to different drugs, these
Mhm.
can be symptoms basically that
They
there's
are.
something going on there.
They are.
So my question for you is somebody that wants to do this work, is it looking at those symptoms and then using that to like basically how does somebody begin? Somebody who's listening right now and they haven't done any of this work, what's the first step to uncovering where their trauma is or where okay, the book for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah,
I'm
that's
holding my
that's
book
very
up.
true.
Or it's my book or there's many others. It's not just my book. There's plenty of books out there that will help you begin your trauma healing path. It's but I wrote this book for that person. I wrote this book for that person that's done some work or done a lot of work or done no work. But in whatever stage they're in their recovery and recovery from anything, like I said, from small T trauma, big T trauma, wants to live a life that feels more free and a life that is feeling filled with inner peace. They want to wake up without anxiety. They want to show up to life with a sense of faith and certainty. They want to feel safe in their body. They want to relax their mind. They want to know how to, in the moment, regulate their own nervous system. They want to know what to look for in a therapist and know what types of therapy are available to them and to see that type of therapy through the lens of the patient, not just through the lens of the physician. That's why I wrote this book. I want to open the reader up to all of the infinite possibilities for recovery. And in doing so, give them real-time exercises and practices that they can do with me. The other thing I want most for my reader in this experience is to feel a sense and know that they're not alone. That through my vulnerability and my authentic truth, I give them permission to open up to what may be true for them.
That's so important.
So I hate to sort of answer your question with go get my book, but I'm going to unapologetically do that right now because I believe so deeply in what this has to offer for the individual that you just described.
No, the book's fantastic. I read the whole thing and really enjoyed and it's definitely gonna help a lot of people. One area that when I was reading I found really interesting was the fact that we often think of, trauma affecting the mind and affecting the psyche, but you talk about how certain physical
Mm,
manifestations we can use those to trace back and see what's going on in the mind.
totally.
So I'd love for you to talk about that.
I really cover all bases here. So I there's a chapter about focusing on your body and how you've had these psychosomatic experiences that we've otherwise called physical symptoms or physical diagnosis. And I open the chapter with actually, let me read the opening of that chapter. Let me find it for you. It's quite beautiful. It's called Hiding Behind the Body. It's chapter 4 in the book. With every breath I take, I am sending love, gratitude, and healing to every single cell in my body. Yes, yes, yes. These are the words of my late friend and publisher, Louise Hay. Lulu, as we call her over at Hay House, was a pioneer in mind-body healing. She brought transformational metaphysical principles to the world through her book, You Can Heal Your Life. The premise of the book was that our physical symptoms are directly connected to our thoughts and beliefs. Underneath physical dis-ease is a root cause emotional condition that needs to be processed. According to Louise, if we are willing to do the mental work, almost anything can be healed. And what I share in this is that while I have always believed in that metaphysical philosophy that our physical conditions are a direct reflection of our physical symptoms are a direct reflection of our internal condition, that there's a root cause condition that creates those symptoms. That doesn't take away the fact that that through that process may need medication, may need massage, may need whatever it is. But what it does mean is that that medication or that massage isn't going to be the solution, isn't going to be the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is healing the root cause condition. I went further in this chapter to teach about the work of Dr. John Sarno, who worked on he wrote How to Heal Back Pain and the Mind Body Prescription and just, or Healing Back Pain. I can't remember the exact title, but it's a major book. And it's really based on the fact that when we have these physical conditions, they're psychosomatic, meaning that there's impermissible feelings of rage and fear and trauma that are so unresolved. In IFS language, we would say the exiled parts are so unresolved that they begin to take over physical parts of our body because they've caused so much stress, they've caused so much tension. For me, it was in the gastrointestinal tract. The stress and the tension and the fear and the hypervigilance and the constant anxiety created extreme gastro issues, one after the next, after the next, after the next. And it was only until I really learned how to calm my nervous system and resolve some of these deeper wounds that my stomach is perfect now. I have no problems with my gastrointestinal tract. Like, I'm perfect. So I had to get to the root cause. Doesn't mean that all the while when I was going through those symptoms, I didn't take plenty of supplements and seek counsel, because when you're dealing with the root cause, you're still going to have to show up for the symptoms, right? But it's really about training your mind to recognize that the symptoms that we're having are a reflection of tension and unresolved, impermissible emotions.
What are your thoughts on the idea of using movement and exercise to help with, the mental health aspect? So say there's some trauma going on and a lot of people might be guided to the therapy, to the medication, but what about including a form of movement to help unlock, we'll
Mm-hmm.
say, stuck emotions?
Mm-hmm. In the book, I wrote a chapter that's about somatic experiencing. I'm just pulling it up for a second. Just want to make sure I tell you exactly which chapter it is. Freeing What's Frozen, chapter 8. And I share about the work of Peter Levine and the work of somatic experiencing, which is really helping the patient. The therapist will help the patient, or if you do it on your own through the practices in this book, recognize that so much of the impermissible feelings that we have been hiding from can be resolved through physical movement and connecting to our internal system through restoring a connection to sensations. Peter Levine says that the definition of trauma is the inability to be present. So when we have experiences that are so traumatizing, or even small t traumas, we disconnect from our body, we dissociate, we almost like a soul departure. And the body takes the brunt of all the protection mechanisms, all the ways that we try to protect ourselves from ever having to deal with that pain. So it's projected onto our physical body, or it's truncated in our body. So for instance, you may not have a physical condition, likely it's showing up in some way, but maybe it's a tightness in your chest or a tightness in your stomach. And so in somatic experiencing, rather than focusing on the story and the memories and all the details, they bring it right to the body, right to the body. And for me, there was different physical things that would happen. Like I had this like energy tick like this. It was like there was a supercharged energy that was just like constantly moving through me. And through somatic experience, I've been able to resolve it. It's oftentimes, if you've had a really big trauma, often there's a physical thing that you were not able to complete. So it's stuck energy in your system, which creates more anxiety and more tension and depression. And so it's almost like if you were being, harmed physically and you wanted to push someone off of you, but you weren't able to complete that. In SE, they'll take you very slowly through the process of physically moving and pushing, like redoing and reprocessing the thing you were unable to do in that moment. It's fascinating and it's effective. In that chapter, I give a lot of body-based methods for the reader to begin to just return to their body, to begin to just move energy out. Even exercise is a way of moving stagnant energy. That's why we feel so good afterwards, not just because of the endorphins, but because of the moving out of stagnant energy. So I'll go deep into that, yes.
Earlier, I talked about somebody wanting to really get in and do this work. And one point I want to highlight that you emphasize in the book is that it's not to be done overnight at the snap of your fingers. I think it's important we get into this and talk about how, approaching this over time, unpeeling the layers like an onion is part of doing this work in a healthy way.
I want my readers to use this book annually. I want them to read it now and see what feels resonant and use it. I want them to come back to it in 6 months to a year and read it again and use what's now resonant and useful, or maybe even a month later. I want it to be read multiple times. I want it to be read year after year. I want it to be something you come back to over and over again because this is reflective of. I'm joking around where I'm saying I wrote this book in a year, but I actually really wrote it in 42 years because it took a lifetime of experiences to go through all these different modalities and come to them and spiritually be guided to them. So I want the reader to use what they notice is intriguing to them now, what feels good in their system now. The other thing I do throughout the book is I say over and over, I'm really caring for the reader. And I say over and over, if this is too heavy for you, come back, move to the next chapter, go back to chapter X and do these breathwork practices to resolve it. Contact this therapist. There's so many ways that I co-regulate with the reader through the energy of the book, through the intention of that energy. I'm always checking in with the reader. But yeah, it's a beautiful point. You've done a beautiful job with this interview because you've really experienced the book. And if you want to know how much I appreciate that, and you're touching on the most important elements. And I think that's beautiful. Thank you.
Well, no, it's been a beautiful conversation, and it takes two. You're being very open and vulnerable and sharing your story with people. And I think it's really going to resonate with people. And an area I do want to touch on, if you're comfortable, you quickly mentioned before, the recent miscarriage you experienced, and
Hmm.
you also shared this on social media. And you touched on earlier, you want this book to be a catalyst to help people feel like they're not alone. And I think
Hmm.
miscarriages is something that often there's a stigma there and people don't want to talk about it. And it can be people can feel very alone when they're experiencing that. So if you're open, I'd love to talk about
Yeah,
how
no,
you
I'm
move
so
through that in a
open.
healthy way. And I think it would be really impactful for the listeners.
Yeah. Well, it was such a beautiful experience. I'll first share the tough stuff and then I'm going to share the beautiful light on the end. So I went through a year of IVF treatment, gained 17 pounds, was driving an hour and a half one way, an hour and a half back, all through 2020, like deep into the pandemic. I'm like in and out of the hospital, the doctor's office, doing treatments and retrievals. And anyone who's gone through treatment, I think I did 8 or 9 rounds, which is like a lot. And I know many people have done more, but that is a lot in a year. And it was a lot on my body. But I showed up for it with a lot of fucking faith, man. I was so faithful. I was so steady. One of the things I think I'm most proud of is like how easy I was on myself and how I went through that with so much grace and no uncertainty. And at the end of it all, I finally intervened in my process and was like, you guys are overstimulating me. I want to use less medication. I want to just focus on the quality of the eggs. And that's the round that I got my son, Owen. And it was this perfect embryo. And the embryologist was actually a reader of mine. And she was like, I don't know how they like got through this with like all the HIPAA laws and stuff, but she came into the room when I was getting the transfer and she's like, I just want you to know I knew it was you on the other end. It was your name, but I wasn't sure. And then when I spoke to her on the phone before we got the results on the embryo, I said, send good energy into that embryo. And she's like, that's when I knew it was you. And she was like, you have the most beautiful embryo ever. And so it was a really spiritual experience. And I put this beautiful baby into my body and it was a deep, deep divine moment having that transfer. I felt this soul entering in. And I was with him for 5.5 months, which is a long time, really showing. And unfortunately, in that time, my placenta, he was perfect. He was perfect little embryo. My placenta wasn't giving him what he needed. And so I had to let him go. I had to have to do a DNE, and he was alive, which was so difficult. Like there was days where I was like preparing for this ultimately an abortion pretty much because at that point you have to have an abortion. And um and I was about 2 weeks away from it no longer being legal. So I was really blessed with that because I would have had to continue carrying, and that would have been nightmare. So, long story short, I was blessed with this moment to go through that grief and to come out of that experience. And very quickly, I saw how my tools were right there for me. Immediately, I noticed the dissociation, that dissociative part of me that we talked about that was, does a great job of just shutting shit down. And I noticed her just check out. And I actually said, "Thank you. Let's not stay here forever. But you are doing a beautiful job right now, keeping me from being flooded with extreme emotion." So I was able to use IFS then and really talk to that part and be like, "You're doing your thing. Keep it going. We're good." And then I witnessed my faith set in. About 2 weeks from past the surgery, I was in this beautiful state of only faith. And I knew that the human part of me needed a little bit more trauma recovery from this, and I've used a lot of therapeutic practices to support me. But really, my faith set in so quickly, and it was so clear it was right away even. It was so clear to me in that moment that this soul may come back in another form, in another way, maybe not even through my body. It came clear to me that this soul came to me to remind me and my husband not to sweat the small stuff and to just really get closer. I believe the soul came to me to really strengthen my marriage and connect me even in a whole new level to my husband, connect me even deeper to my toddler, and just appreciate life more. And so while it was a horrible experience, the foundation of faith that I have developed over 20 years or longer, really 42 years, was like a pillow I fell into when I had to face that grief. The other beautiful opportunity it gave me was the experience of grief, because I've been counseling women for decades, over a decade, in this exact grief: loss of a pregnancy, loss of a baby, miscarriage, IVF, all the trauma that goes into this. And I said at one point, I said, "Thank you, God, for giving me this experience so I can speak to it with genuine truth." And that's how I look at all the difficult experiences in my life. Because you could look at this book and be like, "Wow, this girl had a real fucked up shit go down," right? And we all do. We all do. We all do. I just happen to talk about all of it. But what's beautiful about that is that I can walk away. I'll just repeat that. What's beautiful about that is I can say that my devotional practice, my spiritual practice, my therapeutic practice has given me this divine faith and stability and inner safety and trust in my own self, that even in this very traumatic experience, I could move through it gracefully. And now I can look back with gratitude and say, I can see that this wasn't the moment, this wasn't the time. And I am open to creative possibilities for that child to come back.
Gabby, during instances like this, it's always so hard to acknowledge a person that's been through such trying times. But I'm deeply sorry for your loss, and I thank you so much for sharing the story here. And I do think that is something that a lot of people go through and in their
Mhm.
own way,
Mhm.
and it's important to get the word out and to share that. So thank you so much.
Mhm. My pleasure. Thank you for letting me talk about it.
You mentioned grief there, and whether somebody's been through a similar situation with a miscarriage or some other traumatic event in their life that they're grieving, since you are coming so fresh off of this experience, what are some
Mhm.
healthy ways you could help somebody who is feeling like their world is crumbling down right now and
Hmm.
they can't see the other end? How can they move through that in a healthy way?
Yeah, for me, it's only been 3 months. What I would say, there's a book I have to recommend, and it's called Spirit Babies, by a medium named Walter, who is no longer alive, but he dedicated his career to channeling people's spirit babies. And if this resonates with you, go get this book, because it gave me such a new perspective on the birthing process. What it helped me accept in my own spiritual faith is that these souls come to us in different ways and different times, and sometimes just for a short period of time. And they come to teach us lessons. And sometimes they come in for a brief period of time because they want to experience the world in in utero, and then they're like, nope, gonna go back. And so if you turn it over to the soul rather than to your plan and your needs and you ask the soul that is ready for you to come in the way that they feel most safe and secure, then you open up to tremendous possibilities. In my case, I know I want another child, but I don't want to carry it. And there's a handful of ways you can do that. And so that soul is going to come back or is invited back. And if it wants to come back, I'm gonna be open to how to follow the path to get there. That's a very freeing way to look at this. The more spiritually inclined you are, I think the easier it is to move through something like a miscarriage. It's always going to have the human experience of grief and trauma, but then you can, as when you're ready, move into a different belief system. And so I would recommend reading that book, Spirit Babies. It was very, very soothing for me.
And Gabby, in a more general sense, somebody who's dealing with, say, a different kind of devastating time, like the loss of a marriage or, the loss of a job after somebody's invested 20 years of their life into that. What are some ways that somebody can really get in and do the work and work through that grief in a healthy way?
I would say first to the people who haven't experienced that grief yet, get to work now. Because the way that I was able to move through that grief so beautifully was because of the foundational work that I have done over the years. So the more you have these kinds of practices that we've been speaking of, spiritual, therapeutic, whatever they may be, in your system, in your toolbox, in your neural pathways, the easier it is to move through these difficult times. So that's the first answer. And I really recommend, training for life, training for life in all its events. The other thing I would say is if you're someone who's now just facing these kinds of grief and traumas in this moment, really turn inward to the opportunity of what you can learn from it. And it may be too soon. If someone's really fresh off the back of it, that might feel too soon. But that shift in perception moves you out of the victim and into this growth opportunity for a greater connection to your life, to your truth, to your inner sensations. The other thing I would say is go slowly. Don't stay stuck in that dissociated, dismissive place forever, but if it's there, it's protecting you. Be there for a little while. Dip in, titrate in and out. You can't just dive right in, and you can't always stay out. Dip in, dip out, dip in, dip out. It's a slow process. You don't want to rip off the Band-Aid.
Really great advice there. And appreciate the point of, before things do, before shit hits the fan, building up your system and your tools and practicing this stuff on a regular basis. And I'm sure a lot of the people
Mhm.
listening to this are the people that are doing that, but if not, that's great advice.
Mhm.
Well, Gabby, I want to thank you so much again coming on the show, sharing your story and being so real and being so relatable to people. Everybody
Mhm.
has their own traumas and stories and things they've been through, but I'm sure we can all relate in a way to the story that you shared here and the stories you share in your book. And this is just a very powerful conversation that's going to help a lot of people. I know that. And I thank you.
Thank you so much for this thoughtful conversation and for I want to thank your what do we call that part? The overactive part.
Oh, our
That's
chaos.
I want to thank the chaotic part for the good work that that part did in preparing for this conversation and just bringing so much connection to this conversation. And so we have to recognize that part for all the good stuff that he brings, that he or she or whatever it is brings in.
All right, Gabby.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank
all the
you.
best in the meantime. I'm sure we'll do this again down the line. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, sweetie.